Welcome to this explainer. If you ever really want to understand how a political argument takes shape, watching someone absolutely dismantle an opponent's budget is a literal masterclass in strategy. Today, we're unpacking a recent political address from one nation, taking an objective look at their specific critiques of the Labour government's budget, along with their claims of growing electoral momentum. Now, our goal here isn't to take sides, not at all. We're just going to dive straight into the source material to uncover the rhetoric, the specific data points they selected, and the overarching strategy at play.
To map this all out neutrally, we'll be following four key themes: the initial budget critique, tracking the specific economic claims, the proposed policy shifts, and finally, their recent electoral momentum. Let's just jump right in.
Okay, Section 1, the budget critique.
Every effective political address starts by clearly defining the problem. And right here, the speaker establishes some foundational social and political grievances against the current government. The source material immediately frames its argument around one absolutely central premise, that Labour and Treasurer Jim Chalmers, quote, have no idea what the average Australian is concerned about. So they're setting up this deliberate narrative, right? It's the classic disconnected elite versus the everyday citizen.
Now, according to the speech, this perceived abandonment isn't just some vague feeling in the air. It's evidenced by very specific social policy grievances. First, the speaker highlights Labour's absence in the Farrer election as a sign of, well, political cowardice. But the argument actually goes a lot deeper than that. The transcript points to widespread public frustration over cultural acknowledgements, specifically citing anger over being welcomed to our own country. On top of that, the speaker outlines concerns regarding language integration, arguing that a deaf ear has basically been turned to people who reject core Australian values. So by linking a missing candidate in Farrer to this anger over cultural acknowledgements and integration, the speaker is deliberately intertwining cultural anxiety with their political critique to really build their case.
Moving on to Section 2, tracking the economic claims.
So what's really fascinating here is how the speaker abruptly transitions from those broad social issues into a rapid-fire sequence of highly specific economic metrics. It's a classic rhetorical pivot. They use cultural grievances to grab your attention, and then, boom, they deploy hard numbers to legitimize their critique of the federal budget. The source emphatically highlights that gross national debt is projected to reach $1 trillion by next year. But listen to the phrasing they use. They actually call it a million dollars. Repeating a million is a brilliant, deliberate rhetorical choice. It takes this abstract astronomical number and makes it feel intensely tangible and overwhelmingly large. They argue that this massive burden is just being unfairly dumped on younger generations.
Building right on top of that debt anxiety, the speaker moves straight to taxation. Imagine preparing for a massive $77 billion tax hit next year, all while the government allegedly provides zero long-term revenue projections. That is the exact, specific anxiety this speech is aiming to trigger. The argument they're presenting is that the current administration is essentially hiding its true financial plans, while simultaneously reaching way deeper into the pockets of everyday, hard-working Australians. And to top off this entire picture of economic anxiety, you've got the looming, incredibly frustrating threat of 7% inflation. The speaker is meticulously stacking these metrics. Think about it, $1 trillion in debt, billions in new taxes, surging inflation. They're doing this to paint a picture of just absolute economic mismanagement. Now, the government claims they're going to help young people get into houses, but the speaker points squarely at these alleged 10% interest rates and asks a pretty brutal question. How on earth are young people actually supposed to buy homes? It's a very direct, targeted challenge to the feasibility of the government's promises. They're contrasting that polished political rhetoric against the really harsh reality of compounding interest.
To really drive this whole economic critique home, the speaker brings in a direct historical comparison. They look all the way back to 1975 to former Prime Minister Gough Whitlam, who, as you might remember, was turfed out in a landslide defeat due to alleged economic incompetence. Well, at that time, Whitlam's government collected revenues at 24.5% of GDP. Fast forward to today, and the speaker points out that the current treasurer, Jim Chalmers, is projecting revenues at a notably higher 27% of GDP, with promises of even higher taxes down the line. That historical parallel lands perfectly for their audience. The current government is demanding a much higher percentage of the nation's wealth than a government that is historically famous for being voted out over its economic record.
Which brings us to Section 3, proposed policy shifts.
Having laid out all these perceived problems, this is exactly where the critique transforms into an actionable political platform. And let me tell you, this is a very sharp pivot away from mainstream trajectories. The demands here are drastic. They want to roll back environmental commitments entirely.
ending financial handouts for renewable energy, scrapping the net zero target completely, and exiting the Paris Agreement immediately. Instead of all that, the Speaker advocates for utilizing Australia's plentiful natural resources to generate wealth. They also call for strict immigration controls and an end to what they describe as the era of bribing voters with irresponsible spending.
Expanding on that topic of immigration, the source takes a completely uncompromising stance. They state flatly, quote, "We will decide who comes to this country, and no one is welcome to bring the problems they left behind." This is a message anchored entirely in national sovereignty and social preservation. The core argument here is that strict control over borders isn't just an option, it's entirely necessary to prevent imported social problems and to maintain the overall stability and unity of the nation.
Now, to justify these aggressive demands and to frame them not as fringe ideas but as the actual will of the people, the Speaker cites some very specific polling data. According to the transcript, barely 30% of voters actually support the current Albanese and Chalmers government. By highlighting this, One Nation strategically positions their own platform as representing that disenfranchised 70% majority. It's a really clever move to reframe the political narrative, basically claiming that they are the ones holding the true mandate of the everyday Australian.
All right, Section 4, Recent Electoral Momentum.
So, the crucial point we have to look at now is how the source connects all this hardline policy rhetoric directly to tangible victories. Because let's face it, rhetoric is one thing, but actual political relevance requires hard proof of voter support. To dispel any claims that One Nation is merely a protest party, the Speaker points to a recent event they literally describe as a political earthquake in South Australia. The stats they provide are intended to show severe disruption to the traditional two-party system. We're talking about winning as many seats as the Liberal Party, absolutely smashing the Liberal primary vote, and achieving massive swings even in safe Labour seats. The core takeaway they really want to broadcast here is that they are actually converting their surges in public polling into measurable, concrete votes at the ballot box.
And according to the source address, this momentum caused utter panic among their political opponents during the federal by-election. Notice this multi-step attack campaign they outline. Step 1. Opponents spend an absolute fortune on digital attacks, creating dedicated websites and social media accounts to smear them. Then, Step 2 escalates to the physical world in traditional media, with billboards erected across the electorate and dozens of hit pieces run in the press. Finally, Step 3 involves on-the-ground intimidation, which the Speaker describes as cheap mudraking and the literal bullying of their grassroots volunteers.
Yet, despite all these alleged massive, coordinated attacks, the speech concludes on a highly triumphant note. The Speaker formally congratulates David Farley, specifically noting he is a native of Narrandera in the Murrumbidgee irrigation area on a truly stunning win in the seat of Ferrer. Acknowledging his presence right there in the Senate chamber serves as this ultimate resolution for their argument. It's their proof that their platform of economic critique and strict national policy is successfully cutting through the noise and winning actual legislative power. So, we've seen how this address meticulously links everyday social grievances to high-level economic data. We saw how it pivots into demands for drastic policy reversals on climate and immigration, all backed by these claims of surging electoral victories. Regardless of where you personally stand on the political spectrum, understanding the mechanics of this kind of messaging is absolutely vital. As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to consider this. How will this specific brand of aggressive economic critique and populist policy demand force the major parties to adapt? And how will it reshape the ongoing political landscape in Australia going forward? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us, and keep analyzing the arguments behind the headlines.